The morning sun painted the Kansas sky in shades of gold and amber as Hazel O'Connor clutched the tear-stained letter in her trembling hands. It was 1872, and her wedding day had arrived, but instead of walking down the aisle, she was being hustled into a stagecoach bound for Colorado, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Please, Father, you cannot do this," Hazel begged, her green eyes glistening with unshed tears. At 20 years old, she had believed herself a woman with choices, not a pawn in her father's ambitious schemes. Thomas O'Connor, a banker with aspirations that stretched beyond their small town of Brookfield, Kansas, tightened his grip on his daughter's arm. "It is already done. The arrangements have been made. You will marry Judge Peterson in Denver. He is a man of means and influence, everything that penniless cowhand is not." "Reed loves me," she whispered, her voice breaking as she thought of Reed Xavier, the cowboy who had stolen her heart over the past year. "We were to be wed today." Her father's expression hardened. "That man is nothing but a drifter with dirt under his fingernails. He could never provide for you as Judge Peterson will. Now get in the coach." With a firm shove, Thomas O'Connor pushed his daughter into the stagecoach. The driver cracked his whip, and Hazel pressed her face against the window, watching her hometown grow smaller in the distance, along with all her dreams of a life with Reed. Miles away, Reed Xavier stood at the altar in the small white church, his hat in his hands, his dark hair combed neatly for the occasion. At 26, he had worked tirelessly on the Circle M ranch, saving every penny to build a future with Hazel. The guests shifted uncomfortably in the pews as minutes stretched into an hour. The whispers grew louder as the church door remained closed, with no bride appearing. Sheriff Mills entered the church, his expression grim as he approached Reed. "Son, I think you ought to know. The O'Connor house is empty." Neighbors saw them loading trunks onto a coach at dawn. Reed's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "They've left town. All of them. No word to anyone where they were headed." The church fell silent as Reed's knuckles whitened around the brim of his hat. "She wouldn't leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not without telling me. Something's wrong." He strode down the aisle, ignoring the pitying glances from the assembled townspeople. Outside, he mounted his horse, Thunder, and raced toward the O'Connor house, praying for some explanation, some sign that Hazel hadn't abandoned him on their wedding day. The house stood empty, the doors locked, curtains drawn. Reed circled the property, looking for any clue about where they might have gone. Behind the house, near the woodpile, he spotted Mrs. Jenkins, the O'Connor's elderly neighbor. "Mrs. Jenkins," Reed called out, dismounting quickly. "Did you see the O'Connors leave this morning?" The old woman nodded, her rheumy eyes sad. "Poor girl was crying something fierce. Heard Mr. O'Connor mention Denver. Something about a judge." She patted Reed's arm. "That girl loves you, son. Never doubt it. This wasn't her choice. Denver. A judge." The pieces fell into place, and Reed felt a rage unlike any he had ever known. Thomas O'Connor had never approved of him, had made no secret of his desire for Hazel to marry someone of status. But to force her away on their wedding day? To sell her off to some judge in Denver? "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," Reed said, already turning back to Thunder. "I need to speak with my boss." Within the hour, Reed stood before Marcus Montgomery, owner of the Circle M ranch, explaining the situation. The older man listened silently, then nodded. "Take what you need, Xavier. But understand this isn't a short trip. Denver's a long way, and finding one girl in a city that size won't be easy. I can't hold your job indefinitely." Reed nodded, understanding the sacrifice he was making. "I appreciate that, sir. But I can't leave her there. Not with a man she doesn't love." "Then you'd better ride fast," Montgomery said, handing him his last month's wages. "The stage to Denver left this morning. With luck, you might catch it at one of the stops along the way." With provisions hastily packed and his meager savings tucked into his boot, Reed set out on Thunder, his heart set on one mission: finding Hazel and bringing her home whatever the cost. The stagecoach journey was grueling. Hazel sat stiffly beside her mother, Catherine, who occasionally patted her hand in silent sympathy. Across from them, her father stared out the window, his expression fixed with determination. "You will thank me someday," he said during their second day of travel. "Judge Peterson is 52, but he is respected throughout Colorado territory. As his wife, you will want for nothing." Hazel turned away, unable to look at the man who had orchestrated her misery. "Except love," she whispered. Her father snorted. "Love? What has love ever built? Has it built banks or railroads? Has it established fortunes or shaped territories? You are young, Hazel. You will learn that comfort and security are worth more than fleeting emotions. Is that why you married Mother?" Hazel challenged, glancing at Catherine, whose eyes widened in surprise at her daughter's boldness. Thomas's face darkened. "That is quite enough. You will compose yourself before we reach Denver. Judge Peterson expects a lady, not a willful child." Hazel fell silent, but inside, her mind worked frantically. She had to find a way to escape, to get word to Reed. But how? They never left her alone at the stops, and the stagecoach driver was a friend of her father's, watching her with hawkish eyes whenever they changed horses. As the miles stretched on, Hazel's hope dimmed. By the time they reached Denver 3 days later, she felt hollow inside, moving mechanically as they checked into a hotel. Tomorrow, she would meet the man her father had chosen, and her fate would be sealed. Reed pushed Thunder hard, following the stagecoach route toward Denver. At each stop, he asked about the O'Connors, learning they were a day ahead of him. But Thunder was a strong horse, and Reed rode through the nights, stopping only when necessary to rest his mount. On the 4th day, as he approached Denver, Reed considered his next steps. Denver was a bustling city of nearly 5,000 people. Finding Hazel wouldn't be easy, especially if her father had taken precautions to hide her away. His first stop was the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Denver and the most likely place for a banker like Thomas O'Connor to stay. The clerk behind the desk eyed Reed's dusty clothes and unshaven face with suspicion. "I'm looking for the O'Connor family," Reed said, placing a silver dollar on the counter. "They would have arrived yesterday from Kansas." The clerk's eyes flicked to the coin, then back to Reed. "I cannot divulge information about our guests, sir." Reed added another dollar. "Please, it's important." After a moment's hesitation, the clerk pocketed the coins. "Room 214. But they went out about an hour ago." Heard them mention the courthouse. The courthouse. Reed's stomach twisted. Was the judge already there? Was he too late? He raced through the streets of Denver, Thunder's hooves clattering on the cobblestones. The courthouse loomed ahead, a grand building of red brick and white columns. Reed tied Thunder to a hitching post and took the steps 2 at a time. Inside, he grabbed the arm of a passing clerk. "I'm looking for Judge Peterson. Is he in session today?" The young man adjusted his spectacles. "Judge Peterson is in his chambers. He has a private appointment this afternoon. Some family from Kansas, I believe." Reed's heart pounded. "Where are his chambers?" "Second floor, east wing." "But you can't just—" Reed was already moving, taking the stairs at a run. He burst into the east wing corridor just as a door opened, and Thomas O'Connor stepped out, followed by Catherine and finally Hazel, her face pale and resigned, wearing a blue dress that made her look like a stranger. "Hazel," Reed called, his voice echoing down the hallway. Hazel's head snapped up, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Reed." Thomas O'Connor stepped between them. "What are you doing here? How dare you follow us?" Reed ignored him, his eyes locked on Hazel. "I'm not letting you go, Hazel. Not like this." A tall, distinguished man with silver at his temples appeared in the doorway. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Peterson demanded, his cold eyes taking in the scene. "This is nothing, Your Honor," Thomas said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding that will be resolved immediately." "This isn't a misunderstanding," Reed said firmly, standing his ground despite the arrival of a courthouse guard at the judge's signal. "Mr. O'Connor took Hazel away on our wedding day without her consent. She was coerced." "Is this true?" Judge Peterson asked, looking at Hazel. For a moment, the corridor was silent. Hazel looked from her father to the judge, then to Reed, whose eyes burned with love and determination. Something shifted in her expression. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was to marry Reed Xavier yesterday in Brookfield. My father forced me onto the stagecoach at dawn and brought me here against my will." Judge Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Thomas, you did not mention any prior engagement." "It was nothing official," Thomas sputtered. "A childish infatuation. You and I had an understanding that presumed the young lady's consent." Judge Peterson interrupted, his tone cold. I have no interest in a bride who loves another. That would be most unseemly. Hazel stepped forward, moving to Reed's side. I'm sorry you were misled, Your Honor, but my heart belongs to Reed Xavier, and it always will. Thomas O'Connor's face flushed dark with rage. You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done to secure your future, that's enough, Judge Peterson said firmly. I believe this matter is settled. The young lady has made her choice clear. He nodded to Reed. I suggest you two return to Kansas with all haste before her father concocts another scheme. Reed's arm slid around Hazel's waist. Thank you, Your Honor. But as they turned to leave, Thomas grabbed Hazel's arm. If you walk out that door with him, you are no longer my daughter. You will never be welcome in my home again. Tears filled Hazel's eyes, but her resolve didn't waver. Then I will make a new home with the man I love. Catherine O'Connor stepped forward, surprising everyone. Thomas, stop this madness. Can't you see what you're doing? She turned to Hazel. Go, darling. Be happy. I will handle your father. With a last grateful look at her mother, Hazel let Reed lead her down the corridor, away from her father's fury and toward an uncertain future, but one they would face together. They rode double on thunder, leaving Denver behind as the sun began to set. Where are we going? Hazel asked, her arms wrapped around Reed's waist. There's a small town called Cedar Ridge about 20 miles east of here. We can spend the night there, then decide our next move. Our next move, Hazel repeated, resting her cheek against his back. I like the sound of that. Cedar Ridge proved to be little more than a wide spot in the road, a general store, a saloon, and a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Pearson. The older woman eyed the pair suspiciously when they requested a room. We're not married, Reed admitted honestly. But we would have been, if not for circumstances beyond our control. Mrs. Pearson's stern expression softened slightly. 2 rooms then. Adjacent. And I'll expect proper behavior under my roof. They agreed readily, grateful for the woman's grudging hospitality. After a simple dinner in the boarding house kitchen, they sat on the porch swing, planning their future. I can't go back to Brookfield, Hazel said softly. Not with my father's anger still fresh. And you've likely lost your position at the Circle M. Reed nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about that. I heard talk in Denver about land opening up near the Colorado-Wyoming border. Good grazing land that the government is practically giving away to settlers. What if we staked a claim? Built something that was ours. A homestead. Hazel's eyes brightened. Reed, do you really think we could? It wouldn't be easy, he cautioned. The winters are harsh, and we'd be starting with almost nothing. We'd have each other, Hazel said simply. That's more than nothing. Reed smiled, taking her hand in his. There's one thing I need to do first, though. Mrs. Pearson mentioned there's a preacher who passes through town every Wednesday. That's tomorrow. Are you proposing to me, Reed Xavier? Hazel teased, though her heart raced at the implication. I believe I already did that back in Brookfield, he reminded her. But yes, Hazel O'Connor, I'm asking if you'll marry me tomorrow, in this little town, with nothing but a borrowed dress and a preacher who splits his time between here and 3 other settlements. Hazel's answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his, a brief but fervent promise. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The next morning, Mrs. Pearson surprised them by producing a simple white dress that had belonged to her daughter. She married a banker in St. Louis 5 years ago, the widow explained. Left this behind, saying she had finer things now. It might need taking in, but it should serve. With the older woman's help, Hazel adjusted the dress while Reed went to confirm arrangements with Reverend Johnston, who had indeed arrived on the morning stage. By noon, they stood together in Cedar Ridge's tiny church, which doubled as the schoolhouse, with Mrs. Pearson and the general store owner as their only witnesses. Dearly beloved, Reverend Johnston began, his voice filling the small space with warmth and authority. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Reed slipped his mother's simple gold band onto Hazel's finger, the one possession he had managed to keep with him during his journey, tears spilled down her cheeks. I now pronounce you man and wife, the Reverend declared. You may kiss your bride. Reed drew Hazel into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the years to come. They signed the marriage certificate with steady hands, now officially Mr. and Mrs. Reed Xavier. That evening, they shared their first meal as a married couple in Mrs. Pearson's dining room. The widow had prepared a special dinner in honor of the occasion, complete with apple pie for dessert. To new beginnings, Reed toasted, raising his glass of cider. And to finding your way back to each other, Mrs. Pearson added with unexpected sentimentality. Not everyone gets that chance. Later, in the privacy of what was now their shared room, Reed and Hazel spoke of their plans. We'll need supplies before heading north, Reed said. Tools, seeds, enough food to last until we can establish ourselves. My mother slipped me $20 when we said goodbye, Hazel admitted. And I have my grandmother's locket. It's gold and could fetch a decent price. No, Reed shook his head firmly. We're not selling your locket. That's your history, part of who you are. We'll make do with what we have and work for the rest. Hazel touched his face gently. You are a good man, Reed Xavier. I am proud to be your wife. In the morning, they bid farewell to Mrs. Pearson and set out on Thunder, their few possessions packed behind the saddle. They traveled slowly, stopping in small towns along the way to work for supplies and information about the land to the north. In a settlement called Riverbed, Reed found work breaking horses for a week, earning enough to buy a second horse, a sturdy mare they named Willow, and a small cart. Hazel took in mending and helped at the local boarding house, adding to their growing nest egg. As they worked, word of their story spread through the small community. One evening, a grizzled old trapper named Silas approached them outside the general store. Heard you young folks are heading up to claim land near the Wyoming line, he said, squinting at them from beneath bushy eyebrows. Reed nodded cautiously. That's our plan. Got a map? Silas asked. When Reed shook his head, Silas grunted. Thought not. Come with me. Got something to show you. They followed him to a small cabin on the edge of town, where he unrolled a hand-drawn map on his table. Been trapping these parts for 30 years. Know every creek and valley. There's a spot here, he tapped a location, about 5 days' ride north. Good water, sheltered valley, plenty of game. Most folks pass it by 'cause it's tucked away behind a ridge. But it's prime land. Reed studied the map, committing the landmarks to memory. Why are you telling us this? Silas shrugged. Getting old. Won't be making that trip again myself. Shame to see good land go to waste. Besides, his eyes twinkled as he glanced at Hazel. Reminds me of me and my Martha, God rest her soul. We came out here with nothing but dreams too. Armed with Silas's map and directions, Reed and Hazel continued their journey north. The terrain grew more rugged, the settlements fewer and farther between. But the beauty of the landscape was breathtaking, vast stretches of prairie giving way to pine forests and rolling hills. On the 5th day, just as Silas had predicted, they crested a ridge and looked down into a sheltered valley. A clear stream cut through the center, surrounded by lush grass and stands of aspen and pine. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in early summer. It's perfect, Hazel breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. Reed squeezed her hand. This is it. This is our home. They made camp by the stream that first night, planning where their cabin would stand, where they would plant crops, where the livestock would graze once they had some. With each detail they discussed, the dream became more real, more tangible. Under the vast canopy of stars, Reed held Hazel close. Are you happy? He asked softly. Truly happy? This isn't the life you would have had as a judge's wife. Hazel lifted her head to look at him. This is exactly the life I want. With you. She kissed him gently. Besides, I've always wanted an adventure. The next morning, they began the hard work of building their homestead. Reed felled trees while Hazel cleared land for a garden. They constructed a temporary shelter of canvas and branches while working on a more permanent log cabin. The days were long and exhausting, but they worked side by side, learning from their mistakes and celebrating their successes. When the walls of the cabin finally stood complete, they held an impromptu dance in the clearing, Reed humming a tune as he twirled Hazel around. As summer turned to fall, they made a trip to the nearest town, a 3-day journey to file their land claim and stock up on supplies for the winter. The government agent seemed surprised to see such a young couple claiming land in such a remote area, but processed their paperwork without question. It's official, Reed said as they left the office, waving the deed. 160 acres, all ours. While in town, Hazel sent a letter to her mother, letting her know they were safe and had established a homestead. She didn't expect a reply, but felt better knowing her mother wouldn't worry. To their surprise, when they returned to the same town 2 months later for additional supplies, a letter awaited them at the general store. My dearest Hazel, I cannot express the joy I felt upon receiving your letter. Your father, as stubborn as he is, has forbidden me to speak your name, but I think of you every day and pray for your happiness. I have enclosed what I could without raising suspicion. Consider it a belated wedding gift. Your father's business has prospered, but I find our home empty without your laughter. Know that you are loved, daughter, and that perhaps one day, time will soften your father's heart. Until then, I remain your loving mother. Catherine. Tucked inside the envelope was $50, a fortune that would see them through the winter with greater comfort than they had dared hope for. We should send it back, Reed said, though his eyes betrayed his conflict. The money would make a tremendous difference in their preparations for the harsh winter ahead. Hazel shook her head. It's a gift freely given, from a mother to her daughter. We would dishonor her sacrifice by refusing it. With the unexpected windfall, they purchased a milk cow, more tools, warm blankets, and seeds for spring planting. The shopkeeper's wife, impressed by their industry, threw in a sack of hard candies for those long winter nights. Their first winter in the valley tested them severely. Snow piled high around the cabin, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze in the bucket by the fire. They huddled together under every blanket they owned, reading aloud from the few books they had brought and planning improvements for the spring. Despite the hardships, those winter months cemented their bond. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to work together seamlessly, to find joy in the smallest pleasures: a cup of hot coffee, the warmth of the fire, the stars visible through the small window on clear nights. When spring finally arrived, they emerged from their cabin like bears from hibernation, eager to feel the sun on their faces. The valley came alive with wildflowers, and the stream, swollen with snow melt, rushed merrily through their property. They set to work immediately, planting the garden, building corrals for future livestock, and adding a second room to their cabin. Reed trapped and traded furs in the nearest settlement, returning with chickens and a pair of goats to add to their growing homestead. As their first anniversary approached, Reed rode into town alone, returning with a mysterious bundle he refused to show Hazel. On the morning of their anniversary, he presented her with a small wooden rocking chair, lovingly crafted by his own hands. For sitting on the porch in the evenings, he explained as Hazel ran her hands over the smooth wood. And for other purposes, someday. His meaning wasn't lost on her, and she blushed, thinking of the children they hoped to have. It's perfect, she said, kissing him softly. I have something for you too. She disappeared into the cabin, returning with a leather-bound journal. I've been working on this all winter, she explained as Reed opened it. Inside, in her neat handwriting, was the story of their love from their first meeting in Brookfield to the building of their homestead. She had illustrated the pages with small sketches and pressed wildflowers from the valley. So our children and grandchildren will know how it all began, she said softly. Reed's eyes glistened as he pulled her into his arms. I love you, Hazel Xavier, more than I ever thought possible. Their second year on the homestead brought both challenges and triumphs. A late frost threatened their crops, but they saved most of the garden by covering the plants with burlap sacks. A bear killed 2 of their chickens before Reed managed to drive it away. But the cow gave birth to a healthy calf, and the goats produced enough milk for Hazel to try her hand at making cheese. In the fall of that year, they received an unexpected visitor. Reed was repairing the roof when he spotted a rider approaching from the south. He climbed down quickly, reaching for his rifle. Strangers in these parts were rare and not always friendly. As the rider drew closer, Hazel gasped. Mother! Catherine O'Connor dismounted awkwardly, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. Hazel, my darling girl. The women embraced tearfully while Reed took the horse to water. When they had composed themselves, Catherine explained her presence. Your father passed away 3 months ago, she said, accepting the cup of tea Hazel offered. A heart seizure. It was very sudden. I'm sorry, Hazel said, and found she meant it despite everything. In his final moments, he asked for forgiveness, Catherine continued. He mentioned your name. She reached into her satchel and withdrew a leather portfolio. He left everything to you, Hazel. The house, the bank shares, all of it. Reed and Hazel exchanged stunned glances. I don't understand, Hazel said. He disowned me. In anger, yes. But he never changed his will. Catherine smiled sadly. I believe, in his own way, he regretted what happened. He was too proud to say it. But perhaps this was his way of making amends. What will you do now? Reed asked, joining them at the table. That depends on you both, Catherine replied. I've sold the house in Brookfield. I thought perhaps, if you were willing, I might build a small place nearby. Not too close, she added hastily, but near enough to watch my grandchildren grow someday. Hazel looked at Reed, who nodded his agreement. We would like that very much, she said, squeezing her mother's hand. That evening, after Catherine had gone to sleep in their bed, they insisted, taking blankets to the barn loft themselves. Reed and Hazel stood outside under the stars. Everything's changed, Hazel said, leaning against him. We're not poor homesteaders anymore. Does that matter to you? Reed asked quietly. We could sell this place, move back east, live comfortably on your inheritance. Hazel looked around at the homestead they had built with their own hands, the cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows, the corral where their small herd of animals rested. This is our home, she said firmly. We've worked too hard to abandon it. But, she added thoughtfully, the money could help us expand. Maybe build a proper house, buy more livestock. We could hire help during harvest season. Reed smiled, relieved. I was hoping you'd say that. I've grown rather attached to this valley. Besides, Hazel added, a mysterious smile playing on her lips, we're going to need the extra space soon. Reed's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. Hazel, are you saying? She nodded, her eyes shining in the moonlight. In about 7 months, if my calculations are correct. With a whoop of joy, Reed lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back on the ground. A baby, he whispered in wonder. Our baby. In the years that followed, the Xavier homestead flourished. Catherine built a cozy cabin a quarter-mile away, close enough to help, but far enough to give the young family privacy. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Reed Xavier after both grandfathers arrived the following spring, healthy and strong with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Word of their successful homestead spread, and gradually other settlers moved into the area. Reed's knowledge of horses and cattle made him a valuable resource for newcomers, while Hazel's garden produced enough to share with neighbors in need. By the time their 5th anniversary arrived, they had added a daughter, Catherine Hazel, to their family. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 rooms and a covered porch where Hazel's rocking chair sat alongside a matching one Reed had made for himself. On a warm summer evening, they sat together on that porch, watching their children play in the yard, while Catherine hung laundry on the line nearby. The valley stretched before them, golden in the setting sun, dotted with the cabins of neighbors who had become friends. Did you ever imagine this? Hazel asked, her hand finding Reed's. That day in Denver, when you came for me, did you ever think we'd have all this? Reed squeezed her hand, thinking back to the desperate young man who had ridden day and night to find his bride. I knew we'd have each other, he said simply. Everything else is just a blessing I never dared hope for. As the children ran to them, laughing and breathless from their play, Reed and Hazel welcomed them into their embrace, a family born of love, perseverance, and the courage to forge their own path, against all odds, in the Wild West they now called home.